Well, good morning. It's good to be with you this morning. John Mark is here, so if you've seen him and you're like, that's weird, why isn't he up there? He was on vacation with his family this past week, and one of the wonderful benefits of our personnel committee, that when we take vacation as pastors, we get the Sunday before and the Sunday after off, which is actually really is a blessing, and very thankful for that. So if you see him, go ahead and give him a hard time, that he's not working today, but he is here. We get to start this morning a brand new series about Judges. We're going to be looking at the book of Judges throughout the whole summer, pretty much. It's going to take us that long to get through it all. And I'm excited about this. I love the book of Judges. It's one of my favorite books in the Bible. If you're not familiar with it, it's wild. It's pretty crazy. It's graphic at times. It's gruesome at times, disturbing at times. That's not the reason why I like it. That's a weird way to start this morning. This is great. It's a great book about revealing our human nature and our failings, but at the same time also revealing the character of God and his patience with us. It really is a phenomenal book, and I hope you will enjoy us going through it this summer. So go ahead, open up your Bibles, chapter 1 of Judges, and while you're flipping there in your Bibles, I want to ask you a question. How many of you enjoy yard work? Let me see, raise your hand. If you enjoy yard work, that is your thing, you guys are crazy, okay? No, that is not my thing at all. We moved into a house recently, just this past year, and when you move to a new home, sometimes the yard isn't the best. And our yard is definitely not the best. The backyard, over half of it is just dirt, and we can't get anything to grow. And the front half that does have stuff growing is a mixture between weeds and other weeds. Like that's all we really have, and it's hard work. And so if you want a good yard and nice flower beds and stuff like that, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of work, and you have to be committed to it, right? It's not one of those things of like, oh, I'll get around to it when I feel like you got to be committed. You got to water regularly, mow regularly, get out there and weed eat and all that stuff. And if you don't, it shows, right? Even in like winter, when everything's dead and dormant, you're not supposed to have to do anything. You have to, because if you don't, when spring comes around, it's evident, and you're like, oh yeah, there's all the weeds again, right? So it takes a full commitment. You can't have a half-hearted commitment when it comes to wanting to have a good yard. And that's true in other areas of life as well, right? Like if you want to be healthy, you have to be fully committed. You can't just on Monday I'm going to eat salad and tofu, and then the rest of the week be like, McDonald's, Big Mac, supersize those fries and give me a milkshake too. And then on Saturday expect to lose weight. Like it doesn't work that way, right? A half-hearted commitment is really no commitment at all. If you're going to be committed, it takes a real full commitment. And that's true with grades. If you want to make good grades, you can't just work at it the first 6 weeks. It's got to be all year long, right? You have to do that. At your job, if you're really going for that promotion, it takes a full commitment. You got to really put in the effort. We understand this principle is true in all areas of our life. That half-hearted commitment's really no commitment at all. And sometimes there's even potential dangers that go along with only being half-hearted committed. And I think that's what we're going to see this morning in Judges chapter 1. That we have here the tribes of Judah, they're only half-hearted and committed to following all of the commands of God completely. And so we're going to look at the text here, all of chapter 1 this morning, but before we jump into the specifics, just to put Judges in context for us so that we have a better picture of understanding of kind of where this is in the big picture of God's story, let's kind of go backwards a little bit in our Bible history. So we're going to go over here. And so back, if you remember, on a timeline, yeah, okay, good. I did go the right way. Yeah, in a timeline, before Moses and all the way back to Abraham, God called to Abraham and said, you are going to be the father of a great nation. And through that nation, I'm going to bless all the nations of the earth. And we find that in Genesis 12, this covenant that God establishes with Abraham. But also a part of that covenant is also in Genesis 15, that God also promises Abraham land. That there's very specific land that goes along with this promise of a great blessing of a future nations that will come from him, will live within this very specific land. And so God takes Abraham and takes him to this promised land. And he lives there, and a few generations go by, and we have one of his descendants, Joseph. If you're familiar with Joseph, he's the guy that had the multicolored sports jacket that his brothers didn't like and sold him off to slavery. And so there, Joseph ends up in Egypt, and he's able to rise up in power by God's providence, and he becomes second in command of all of Egypt. A great famine occurs, and so now the Hebrew people need to go to Egypt, and he is able to care for them and provide for them and takes care of them. Great story there in the second half of Genesis of God's provision for his people. They stay there. They don't go back to the promised land. They stay there, and after several generations, we have a new Pharaoh who comes along and decides to enslave the Hebrew people and puts them into bondage. That's when Moses is called out to deliver the Hebrew people out of bondage, out of slavery, and the goal is to take them back into the promised land, just as God had promised Abraham and his descendants. That's where Moses is taking them back. And during that process, we have a new covenant that God establishes with his people, the Mosaic covenant. We're probably most familiar with Exodus 20, the 10 Commandments, but it's so much more than that, this covenant. A great chapter is Deuteronomy 28 that explains a lot of what the understanding is between being God's people, of the blessings that go along with obedience, but also in Deuteronomy 28, the consequences of disobedience. It's a fantastic chapter of really understanding the blessings and the consequences of the covenant relationship between God and his people. And so on their way, they're journeying back into the promised land. And in this relationship that God has established with his people, he gives them very specific instructions on what they're supposed to do when they go back into the promised land. And Moses comes to the end of his life, and so he appoints Joshua to be the one who actually leads the Israelites into the promised land. So he's the one who gets to do that, and the book prior to Judges is all about Joshua. And so just so we can understand the very specific commands that God gave them before we jump into Judges this morning, I want to read for you back in Deuteronomy chapter 7. This is what God told them as they're going to go back into the promised land because foreign nations have now moved in because they've been gone for so long. He tells them this: when the Lord your God brings you into the land that you're entering to possess and drives out before you the many nations, the Hittites, the Gershites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, 7 nations all larger and stronger than you. When the Lord your God has delivered them over to you and you've defeated them, then you must destroy them totally. Make no treaty with them. Show them no mercy. So he makes it very clear. Don't associate with them politically. Don't intermarry with them. Don't give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons. He makes it very clear. Don't associate with them culturally or socially. Here's the reason why. Verse 4, for they will turn your sons away from following me and serve other gods, and the Lord's anger will burn against you and will quickly destroy you. This is what you are to do. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, cut down their Asherah poles, burn their idols in the fire. So he makes it very clear. You're not to associate with them in any way religiously. Don't adopt any of their religious policies or practices. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you out of all the people on the face of the earth to be his people, his treasured possession. That's in Deuteronomy 7. Guess what? He says it again in Deuteronomy 20, verses 16 through 18. It said like this: however, in the cities of the nations of the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, don't leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them. The Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, as the Lord your God's commanded you. Otherwise, they will teach you to follow all the detestable things that they, and you will sin against the Lord your God. God made it very, very clear to the tribes of Israel, as you go into this land of promise, you are to completely drive out and eliminate all traces of pagan worship and pagan culture, not to leave any of it behind. And just so we're clear, when he says you might pick up their detestable things of worship. Understand, some of the practices of the time included child sacrifice. So God is very serious when he says, do not associate with that. Do not participate in that. Do not adopt any of those practices. Don't do it. That's some of the things that they were doing. So again, instructions are very, very clear of what they're supposed to do. So here we go, Judges chapter 1, verse 1. After the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, who will be the first to go up and fight for us against the Canaanites? The Lord answered, Judah is to go. I've given the land unto his hands. So right from the beginning, the way Judges starts, it gives us Joshua has passed on, and so now there is no individual one leader like we've had with Moses and Joshua. Now it's the tribes are to go in and take possession of the land. And how do they begin? Without having a single leader. I love it. They go to God in prayer and say, God, what are we supposed to do? What a great example of the people of God going to him and saying, who's supposed to lead? How are we going to do this exactly? What a fantastic example for us. They don't do this, which I think maybe we're guilty of sometimes. God, I really want to do this, and this is what I'm going to do, so would you bless it? That would be awesome. That's not their approach to prayer. Their approach is, God, we're coming to you without a plan and saying, God, you give us your plan. We want to do what you want us to do. And God answers. God answers. That's a consistent theme that we will see throughout the book of Judges. When God's people earnestly seek him, he responds. And that is still true for us today. And notice what God's answer is in verse 2. Judah is to go. I've given the land into their hands. Judah is the one to go first. Now, Judah is not the oldest of the tribes, but Judah is the one selected to go. The first one to enter into the promised land. And isn't it interesting that later from the line of Judah comes Jesus, the first one that leads us into our promised land. And notice his answer is, go and take the land which I have already given you. Maybe you didn't hear that. God's answer was, go and take the land that I've already given you. That's something to think about, isn't it? God tells them that they are to go and take possession of what he has already promised them. It is already theirs. They just have to go and occupy the land. I wonder how many of the promises of God that he has given us that we haven't really taken hold of. That God has already said, this is yours. We just haven't taken possession of it. When God makes promises like, you have access to the throne room of grace through prayer, do we fully take possession of that promise? When God says that we have a spirit not of fear but of boldness, have we taken hold of that fully? When God says the very Spirit of God lives within you and has the transformative power to grow the fruit of the Spirit in your life, is that a promise that we've really fully grabbed onto? I wonder how many promises of God are ours that we just don't fully experience, that we don't fully understand and realize, simply because we haven't gone and taken possession of it. And so God tells them, it's yours. Go and take it. Verse 3. When the men of Judah said to the Simeonites and their brothers, come up with us into the territory allotted to us and to fight against the Canaanites. We in turn will go with you into yours. So the Simeonites went with them. When Judah attacked, the Lord gave the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hands, and they struck down 10,000 men at Bezek. It was there that they found Adonai-Bezek and fought against him, putting to rout the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Adonai-Bezek fled, but they chased him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and big toes. Yeah, that's kind of, Here's the thing. You think that's weird? Oh, just wait. There's a lot more coming later in Judges, but there we go. Verse 7, then Adonai-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes have cut off, picked up scraps under my table. God has paid me back for what I did to them. They brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. Isn't it interesting that it's the pagan king who recognizes God's justice in his life? He said, this is what I've done to many others, and yet now God is doing it unto me. And so this king, it must be very formidable. He's taken out 70 other kings. So here we have very clearly God is blessing Judah in his conquest, in the tribe's conquest of the land. He's taking out this really big guy. And so we see that, and we're going to continue to see even more and more successes for the tribe of Judah. Verse 8, the men of Judah attacked Jerusalem and also took it. They put the city to the sword and set it on fire. And after that, the men of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites living in the hill country, the Negev and the western foothills. They advanced against the Canaanites living in Hebron, formerly called Kirath Arba, and defeated Shishah and Ammonon and Talmiah. Now that sounds like I really know what I'm saying. I don't. I have no idea how to really pronounce these names, but I learned a long time ago, if you just kind of say it with confidence, people are like, yeah, that's what it is. I apologize if you know how to really pronounce these. It's not my intention to offend, but it just sounds good to me, so that's how I say them, all right? From there, they advanced against the people living in Debir, formerly called Kiriath Sephar. And Caleb said, I will give my daughter Aksah in marriage to the man who attacks and captures Kiriath Sephar. Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it. So Caleb gave his daughter Aksah to him in marriage. Here in this really quick passage, we're introduced to some individual people. First, Caleb. Caleb is one of Joshua's best friends. If you remember the story when Moses sent 12 spies to go check out the land before they were to go in, it was only Joshua and Caleb, that's this Caleb, who come back and say, yep, it's awesome, just like God said it was, let's go take it. That's this Caleb, all right? And then we also have Othniel introduced to us. That's a name you need to remember. We're going to see him again later in chapter 3 of Judges and hear more of his story. So we won't talk about him. We'll talk about him there. And then we also have Caleb's daughter, Aksah. And so here we have just a brief little story about her. Verse 14, one day when she came to Othniel, her husband, she urged him to ask her father for a field. When she got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, what can I do for you? And she replied, do me a special favor. Since you've given me land in the Negev, give me also springs of water. And then Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs. Now it's interesting. We have this little story right here in the middle of all this like fighting and conquest and chopping off big toes and stuff. And then we have this. It kind of seems out of place and odd. Understand, one of my seminary professors, love this, said, the authors of Scripture are always doing something with what they're saying. There's always a reason of why they do what they do. And so here in the middle of all of this, I wish I had more time to go into it. Charles Spurgeon actually gives a fantastic sermon on just these few verses, talking until this moment when Judah comes up against a large army that has horses and chariots of iron. And it says they are not able to continue the victory, that they're stopped. I do not believe the reason why they're stopped is because they came up against a stronger military force. The reason why they were not able to continue on in occupying all of the land was not because this army had better technology and a better military strategy. I think it's rather an example of Judah's lack of faith. Amen. And the reason why is because if you go back to that passage earlier in Deuteronomy chapter 20, in that very same chapter in verse 1, he says this, when you go to war against your enemies and see horses and chariots and an army greater than yours, God said it was going to happen. And he already told him. And this is what he says, do not be afraid of them, because the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, will be with you. God very specifically told them this was going to happen. They were going to come up against a bigger army that had horses and chariots, but do not forget, I'm the one fighting your battle for you. And just in case you still need some more reassurance, remember what I did for you in Egypt. All of those plagues and how I rescued you out. And remember, they had horses and chariots chasing you. I took care of those, didn't I? So I think here we have very specifically an example of Judah's lack of faith, and that them not fully committed to carrying out all of the commands of God, as he said, that they lost faith. And it makes me wonder, why? I mean, Judah, this whole chapter has seen success after success and victory after victory, blessing upon blessing, again and again and again. What happened? Why in this moment did they not continue and carry on? And I think maybe, just maybe, that was the problem. Let me explain that. They had seen God's hand of blessing on their life, and they had victory after victory and success after success again and again and again. So often, it became very normal. It became commonplace. The presence of God in their life, working out the details of their life, became so ordinary for them, they kind of lost the awe and the wonder of God's involvement in their day-to-day. And pretty soon for them, God was kind of like removed from the equation completely, I think, to the point where they started seeing these victories of like, dude, we're really good. Look how strong we are. We've got this great army. We're able to take all these people out. We're able to do all of this. And it became much more this idea of this is what I'm accomplishing. And when a bigger army comes up with iron chariots, they're like, whoa, I don't think I can do that. I don't think I can defeat them. I don't think I have the power and the ability to overcome. That's really scary. And they're right. They didn't. But they had removed God so much from their day-to-day involvement, they completely lost the sight and the reality that God is the one who fights their battles for them. And I wonder, is that a warning for us? Do we kind of lose sight of God's involvement in our day-to-day? How much of God's blessings have we just grown accustomed to that we take for granted? And we've kind of lost the awe and the wonder of God in our day-to-day. Our paycheck has hit our direct deposit week after week, month after month, year after year. We don't even think God's involved with that anymore. God didn't give us that job that provides for our family and puts food on the table. No, that's my hard work, my effort, my ingenuity. That is all me. I've completely removed God from the equation in the day-to-day. And so when difficulties start to pop up in our lives, do we react like Judah? Whoa, that's too big. I can't handle that. There's no way I can fight that in my power. Because we've lost the awe and the wonder and the recognition of God's involvement in our day-to-day. The very fact that we have life is a gift from God. We take our next breath only because God allows. But yet, we think so much is because of what we do. And God, somewhere in the distance, maybe we might pull him off the shelf if something really big is coming, but most of the time, it's all about us. I think that's kind of what happened to Judah here. That they kind of lost sight of God in their day-to-day involvement. And so when they came up against an obstacle, they didn't have the faith to keep going. Verse 20. As Moses had promised, Hebron was given to Caleb, who drove from it the 3 sons of Anak. Now, right after we have what I think is the lack of faith on Judah's part, the very next verse, we have an example of someone who does demonstrate faith in Caleb. And I believe that those 2 verses are back to back for that very reason, to show the contrast between the two, the failings of Judah, but yet the success of Caleb and his faithfulness. Because Caleb at this time is about 85 years old. And if my understanding of Scripture is right, he's probably the oldest person alive in all of the tribes of Israel. So he's the oldest guy there is, and he goes up and takes out these 3 brothers of Anak. Now, these 3 brothers of Anak, we learn in Numbers and in Joshua, they're giants. They're like NFL football linemen. Like they're big guys. They are warriors. They are scary dudes. And here is Mr. Senior Citizen, 85-year-old Caleb goes and takes them out. That doesn't make sense. And that's the point. Because with God, all things are possible. What does not make sense for us, it's perfectly fine for God. And so right after Judah is looking at chariots and going, we can't do it through human eyes. We can't complete this task. Right after that, we have the mention of Caleb and what he does. Yes, you're right. Through human understanding, it is impossible. But with God, nothing is impossible if we have faith. And so verse 21, and through, we have kind of the conclusion of the story of Judah, and now we're going to jump into some of the other tribes. Verse 21, the Benjamites, however, failed to dislodge the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites live there with the Benjamites. Verse 22, now the house of Joseph attacked Bethel, and the Lord was with them. When they sent men to spy out Bethel, formerly called Luz, the spies saw a man coming out of the city, and they said to him, show us how to get into the city where we can see that, and we will see that you are well treated. So he showed them, and they put the city to the sword, but spared the man and his whole family. He then went to the land of the Hittites, where he built a city and called it Luz, where it is named to this day. So we have here the story of the house of Joseph. That's actually two different tribes that they go find this city and they do what God wants them to do. They wipe it out. And the way they do it is that they find a guy, and I don't know what he tells them, if there's like gives them a secret back door or an underground river. I don't know, but it's like pretty cool, like Navy SEAL type stuff that they do, and they pop up and they take out the city. It's like, yeah. And so they're like, guy, dude, thank you so much for helping us out. Because of that, we're going to be nice to you and we're going to let you go. So this again, like you're like, yeah, this is a cool story. We love this. Rah! But is it a good story? Again, calling back to what God's specific instructions were, is this a good story? They did a good job of wiping out the city pretty much. They did let a guy live and his whole family. And what did this guy do? He goes and doesn't even leave the promised land. He stays there in the promised land, just moved to a different part, and he rebuilds the city and even calls it the same thing. When we're not careful and we hold on to little things that we think, oh, I pretty much am being obedient to God. I'm pretty much being faithful, but this I'm going to hold on to. It's just a private thing. It's just between me and God. Nobody else knows about it. If we don't fully weed out everything that God has told us to, look what can potentially happen. It can start to grow and become just as damaging as it was before. It's called the exact same thing. And so we see here, I believe, again, another failure of one of the tribes. Verse 27, but Manasseh did not drive out the people of Bethshan or Tanakh or Dor or Abilam or Megiddo and their surrounding settlements, for the Canaanites were determined to live in the land. Verse 28, when Israel became strong, they pressed the Canaanites into forced labor, but never drove them out completely. Nor did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites living in Jazer, and the Canaanites continued to live there among them. Neither did Zebulun drive out the Canaanites living in Kitron or Nahalal, who remained among them, but they did subject them to forced labor. Nor did Asher drive out those living in Aku or Sidon or Alab or Akzib or Bela or Aphak or Rehob. And because of this, the people of Asher lived among the Canaanite inhabitants of the land. Neither did Naphtali drive out those living in Beth Shemesh or Beth Anath, but the Naphtali's too lived among the Canaanite inhabitants of the land, and those living in Beth Shemesh and Beth Anath became forced laborers for them. The Amorites confined the Danites to the hill country, not allowing them to come down into the plain. And the Amorites were determined also to hold on to Mount Heraz, Ajalon, and Shalabim. But when the power of the house of Joseph increased, they too were pressed into forced labor. The boundary of the Amorites was from Scorpion Pass to Selah and beyond. That's a lot, right? There's a lot just happened just then. But what I think is happening here is not simply here's a tribe and here's an example of how they failed, and here's a tribe and how they failed. But I think rather it is a slow, gradual spiraling downward. That each successive tribe, it actually gets a little worse and a little worse to the point where at the end, it is not good at all. Judah is great, right? For the most part, they do an excellent job. But I think here with each successive tribe, it gets worse and worse and worse to the point at the very end, we see what we see. And let me see if I can point this out. In verse 28, it says, when Israel became strong, Israel, not one individual tribe, so this is a comment about all the tribes together. When Israel became strong, they pressed the Canaanites into forced labor. They were strong enough to force them into labor, which I believe means the author is saying they were strong enough to drive them out, but they didn't. They compromised and said, whoa, instead of driving them out, we can actually make like this a profit thing for us. We can actually make some money off of this deal. That's so much better. We pretty much have followed God. I mean, we're in control of the land, right? We're able to force them to labor, so that shows we're more powerful, but let's not drive them out completely. So I think that's a specific callback when it says they never drove them out completely to God's command, making it very clear they're not doing what God wants. And now watch the slow progression down because of it. In verse 29, it says Ephraim is the tribe that it's talking about. It says the Canaanites lived with Ephraim in their country. Now notice the subtle change in verse 32 and 34. Asher and Naphtali, they now live with the Canaanites in their country. It's subtle, but it's there. Verse 34, now the Amorites don't even allow Dan, the tribe of Dan, to come in and completely occupy. Previously, they were all sharing. It's getting a little bit worse. Now, the Amorites are like, no, this is still ours. Don't even come in at all. All the way down to verse 36, the Amorites are the ones defining the boundary. They're establishing what the boundary is, meaning the enemy of God is the one dictating to the armies of God, this is what you're going to do, and this is how we're going to live. That's how far it's gotten from Judah down here to the end, where the enemy of God is saying, no, I'm making the rules, and you're going to have to accept it. And they do. They are now allowing the pagan rulers to control and to dictate to them how they are supposed to live. How did it ever get there? One very subtle, slow compromise at a time. Just very subtle, very slow, but over time, they end up down here. And there are a lot of times, I think, in our life when we say, yes, God, I'm following you pretty much. Like, I'm doing really good here. I'm pretty committed. But there's some things, God, that you want of me. That's really hard. And because it's hard, I'm not sure. But 90%, 95% of my life, you have just that, I don't know. And just getting off that 1 degree, it doesn't seem like much. But we know over time that 1 degree can lead us very far away from God's path for us. And we end up here in a culture and a society that's dictating to us how we're supposed to live, and we let them. And we go along with it and say, okay, yeah. We get here one small, subtle compromise at a time. And we justify our reasons, and we tell God, it's just this once. God, it's not that big of a deal. Okay, God, you know my heart, so it's okay if I do this because you know what I really think and believe, right? We say a lot of things, and we justify a lot of reasons why we make one compromise at a time. And when we do, we're there because a half-hearted commitment is really no commitment at all. And there are potential dangers for all of us if we are not fully and totally committed to following the ways of God in all of its entirety. Not wiping out a lot of the sin and holding on to one and then later watching it regrow in our life. Being fully and totally committed. We need to be diligent in our faithfulness, being fully committed in following God in all of his ways. I think that is the lesson for us to learn from Judges this morning. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I know we are not perfect. God, you know we are not perfect. And as we see here of examples of those who wanted to follow you, but yet at times of crisis don't completely trust and put their complete faith in you, we do see that there are consequences to that. And this right here, God, is kind of an area of seeing where they didn't completely get all the weeds. And later on, later chapters, we're really going to see some of the negative effects of that. God, I pray that you would help us to be diligent in our faithfulness to you. Help us to be fully committed, wholehearted. God, allow us to stand strong and not to compromise, not to justify disobedience, but being completely and totally faithful, trusting that you are who you say you are and you will do everything that you have promised to do. That's faith. Help us to be more faithful and not lose the awe and the wonder of you in our life each and every day. Help us to be the people who get to live and experience all the promises, that we fully embrace living in the promised land of faith in knowing you.